Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. And I am blessed to be able to speak with Dan Burke. He is president of the Avila Institute. He's a Catholic author, and he wrote one of my favorite books right now, Spiritual Warfare and the Discernment of Spirits. Thank you, Dan, for joining me.
It's great to be with you, Joseph.
Thank you. I want to tell a little story real quick about how this book got in my hand. You and I were exchanging books a little while ago. I had sent you my book, and then you told me, oh, thank you.
Just for a commercial, it's right on my desk.
Oh, thank you. And then you had told me that you had written this book and you thought it would be helpful for me. And you sent it to me, and then about, I want to say like a week or two later, I think it was your daughter had announced on Facebook that you were in the hospital with COVID-19. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was very soon after. I was shocked. And so of course I started reading the book right away, and it's not a big thick book, but it's a wonderful book. You know, don't let it fool you that it's short. That doesn't mean it's jam-packed and it's not awesome. So and then your daughter, I think it was your daughter again, who had reached out on Facebook to people that knew you, and she wanted them to write something about you and how we know you. And although I've never met you in person, you've been a great personal help and inspiration to me. So I wrote a little something about the book, and it didn't look good for you. Though, I mean, it didn't. It sounded like you weren't going to make it. Just, you know. So could you? I'm sure a lot of people are aware that you were sick and you were thankfully God recovered. Thank God recovered. Could you just say a little something about?
Yeah, I mean, I have chronic lung disease as it is, and I've been near death many times, hospitalized. My body is not my friend. One of my favorite things that St. Francis ever said is he called his body brother ass, and so I totally get that. But so I had been in decline for 3 years already physically. And so I quit EWTN. I was the president of EWTN News, and I left them and just, I gave my notice in December, left later. But then on my a trip from Dallas, I went to see Bishop Strickland, who's the bishop over a community that I'm part of.
Awesome bishop.
And he's a really standout bishop. And but on the plane on the way back, I got COVID-19. And then shortly thereafter, I was hospitalized. My oxygen count declined dramatically. I couldn't breathe. I was on all kinds of medical equipment. I have medical equipment at home that's emergency, and it didn't help me. Went into ICU. They intubated me. 80% of people who they intubate die.
Right.
In people with my situation, more than 80% die.
Wow.
And by God's grace, what you saw, I think, was my wife's posts and things. Thousands of people all over the world poured out their prayers for me. A Mother Superior recently I was talking to of contemplative order said she was weeping for me, and I was so grateful for that when I came out, that you and so many prayed. And what I say to everyone, and I'll just leave it at this: God has his willed ends, right? So he wants something to occur, but he ordains also his means. And I really honestly believe, Joseph, that the prayer you prayed for me specifically is what saved my life. Now, it may sound funny, but now it was necessary for you to pray, and it was also necessary for, 10,000 other people to pray for some reason that I don't know, But I really believe that your prayers and the prayers of so many other good people saved my life. And, I'm happy to be with Jesus. I was ready to die, but I've got a lot to do here apparently. And my wife is very happy that I didn't go. Wrote my will on the way to the hospital, by the way, which is how serious it was. So anyway, on the other side, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be with you and thankful for your prayers.
Oh, you're welcome. When I had heard that you were so ill, I had mentioned to, and most of my friends are Catholic, I had mentioned to them that that you needed prayers, and they, just to show how your message has reached people, they knew who you were. I said Dan Burke, and they said, oh my gosh. So I had several people praying for you. Did you have children, Dan, right?
Yeah, 4 kids. Gosh, they're all empty nested, ranging from, I think, 20, 23 to 27 or 28, something like that. I'm a typical male of the household, so I don't remember all the exact dates and ages. I know when I asked my wife to marry me, but that's a different story.
Because
But
of, oh, I'm sorry,
yeah,
because
go
of
ahead.
all the COVID restrictions, were they able to see you in the hospital, or?
No, one of the traumatic aspects of suffering in this moment is that my wife dropped me off at the hospital and did not hear a word for 3 days.
Oh,
And by God's grace, I mean, the word she heard was a nurse called, and she kind of got the order wrong. I would have never done it this way, but she said, "Mrs. Burke, I need to tell you that your husband has ripped his intubation tube out." And then she said, which she should have said first, "But he's okay. He's breathing on his own, and his oxygen levels are increasing." And she was happy about that. But she also got COVID as well, and was here sick, praying in the chapel behind me for 3 days. She's very holy, and she spent hours and hours and hours alone in silence praying for me. And it gets me emotional. I love her dearly. She's such a good woman, and by God's grace, we're on the other side and healthier than I was when I went in. That doesn't mean I'm healthy, but I'm just healthier than I was when I got
was
sick.
was a priest able to see you, visit you? And no.
No, it's really a travesty, Joseph. I mean, the trash guy was able to come in and change bags, right? But they couldn't get a priest. Nobody. When I came out of when I took out the intubation tube, they actually set up a camera for my wife to be able to see me and talk to me. And a priest friend of ours prayed over me. God be praised. And Bishop Strickland told me that he spiritually visited my room over and over and over again, praying for me. I was anointed. I did get the anointing of the sick before I went in by my brave parish priest who I think fought all of his own fears and came without us asking, came to our home when he heard that I got it before I had gone to the hospital. And he came in, we opened the door and he backed up, and then but he anointed me. And I'm sure that also was efficacious in my healing and recovery.
God bless him.
Yeah.
The first, I'm so happy that you're here.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah. Um, I wanted to say the first time I became aware of you was through the Spiritual Direction website, right? You had
Mhm.
that?
Yeah.
And
Spiritualdirection.com. Yep.
yes. And then I think I became aware of that through Father Bartunek's book, The Better Part, which
Yeah.
is it's one of the greatest, best books I mean I've ever read. As yes,
There's a little
yeah,
it's a great commercial. I agree with you. So it's
it's
published by Sophia Institute Press. We broke it into 4 volumes. I don't know if you have that
I had the
version.
one volume, yes.
Well, it's got larger print, which everybody
Okay,
complained about, and
yeah,
thicker pages. But as a person who appreciates art, and I know you do, it's also a beautiful book and beautifully laid out, and it's very appealing. But I think it's the best daily gospel devotional reflection ever written.
yeah. I mean, I tend to, with the book, highlight and dog ear the pages, but it was just pointless with that book because it was every page.
Right. My wife's looks like that too. But
That's
it's
why,
what a gift. What a gift.
yeah. So I quit. So I started actually with a little notebook and just making notes, and that
Good.
was easier. So that's the way I became aware. First became aware of you, and I thought, I mean, my impression of you was you seemed like a very holy guy, and you're involved with the Catholic media, and I guess a lot of, I don't know, I guess I have an impression, and I think maybe a lot of other people I know have an impression of people in Catholic media or Catholic evangelization as being rather not perfect people, but have had very, nice, very Ward and Cleaver lives, and
Oh gosh,
I know
not me.
no, I know, and that's why this is going to lead me into your book.
Yeah,
Is that, I mean, I don't see, or I haven't seen a lot of people in the Catholic media, specifically men, who have talked about, let's say, their childhood or any really struggles. At the top of my head, I can't name any, and that's why I'm thinking, like, particularly for men, like somebody like Father John Carapi used to be, had a big male following, which is unusual in the
yeah,
Catholic Church, because usually, or right now, we're blessed to have in the church Father Donald Calloway, and
sure.
he's been very open. Well, he wrote a whole book. He's been very open and honest about his past. I think he has a lot of men that listen to him, and I think that's part of the reason. So and here, this is kind of my segue into your book, and this was like in the beginning of the book, you wrote, my child, and I actually wept a little bit when I started reading the beginning of the book, because I'm like, wow, somebody in the Catholic Church is willing to be open and honest about, I'm going to get it, open and honest about their childhood and specifically about trauma. You wrote this, Dan: my childhood was a constant emotional tornado. Some of my siblings didn't make it out alive. Most of those who did, most of those who did survive have been in and out of drug rehab, attempted suicide, and lived generally destructive patterns of life, unquote. Wow, Dan.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of coffins. Saw too many coffins too young. It was, one of my brothers, by God's grace, my dad died, like yours. We both lost our fathers recently. But my dad converted to Catholicism on his deathbed. But my brother I had been estranged with for, gosh, 20 or 30 years,
You
was
mentioned that in the
there.
book too, yeah.
Yeah. And he and I, so he's a former uh, narcotics user and all of that, but he's clean right now, and he's doing really well. God be praised. We do a Bible study together on Sunday night. So not, it, it's kind of a wrecking ball, wreckage, my home, but God works all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose, and who say yes to him. And so I have hope for at least one of my siblings right now. So
It was so important, I think, too. Because I mean, your book is not an autobiography,
no,
but there's, you certainly talk about yourself and your experiences. Whereas, with my book, some Catholics are, I don't want to say squeamish, but they don't like the idea of these sort of revelations. But I think, in terms of me and other people I know who have been wounded and who've lived through traumatic experiences, because my impression of you is like, you're a Catholic, you're a husband, you're a father, you seem happy, well adjusted, and spiritually healthy of your physical problems. But I wouldn't have guessed that you came from a traumatic childhood,
yeah,
because we don't there aren't a lot of examples of people who have been able to overcome that. I mean, there just aren't. And this is really important, what you wrote here. Those who have lived through abuse know that it stays with you, the tortured twisting and turning of mind and heart, constantly replaying the scenes and the hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
People don't get that, that haven't, they, this is really, really, I don't want to, but this is so important, I think, specifically coming from a man, because you don't hear a lot of men talk about child abuse and trauma. And I think part of that is men don't have the resources that women do. I mean, women
Yeah.
have other women to
Hmm.
discuss, and that's very much, and they have their mother and sisters, and they have a network. Men tend to not have those things. I mean, conversations with men, and I know I'm being grossly, I'm generalizing, but
That's
men,
accurate.
okay, men, the conversations tend to be more superficial
Yeah.
about sports.
Or
Just
blowing
to,
stuff up or shooting something or fishing or, whatever. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah. And I don't know why that is. I mean, I think that American culture is hyper individualistic in nature. Its DNA is, bootstrap, fix yourself, buck up, whatever. And Catholic culture is pretty much gone, except in homeschool groups, or, the only place Catholic culture is really strong typically is in traditionalist communities, for better or worse, depending on the community. And so guys don't have a place to talk about scripture. I remember the first guy who witnessed to me as before I became a Christian. He said, and you'll laugh, I think you'll get this, but he said, well, one, he was very nice to me at my workplace, and I thought he was hitting on me. And so as a man, like from my background, the way I was going to deal with that is I was going to put his lights out. So we went out back and, and went through this process. And then, and then when, and then later on we became friends, because I realized that that wasn't happening. And I'm talking about my mentality at that time, by the way. I mean, it's just where I was at. And then one day he said, "Hey, you want to get together and read the Bible together?" And I thought, well, that's really gay. There's no way I'm going to sit across from another dude and share my feelings, which
right.
is to your point, right? It's that I wasn't taught to do that. I was taught to stuff, to be, even though I've always suffered illness. My dad was a strong provider and a strong man,
Mm,
who just basically, he liked to say, "Suck it up,"
yeah, that
and
sounds
so
familiar.
that's what I did. But eventually, I did find Christian community, and I discovered a context in which I I could learn to deal with the turmoil in me. But as you say, women, not only do they have generally more community because that's their that's kind of what they're ordered to, but also they're just better. They're just better at dealing with their feelings than guys are.
Right.
And so it took me a long time to learn and to be free to say what I said in the book. It's not easy to just say that sort of thing.
No, and I think an amount of shame about a, a man revealing that he had experienced abuse, and then
Right.
saying it's still affecting him later.
Right.
Because I wouldn't say a lot of people, I'll say some people have the idea, especially I think with men, is like, why is something that occurred 20, 30 years ago still bothering you? Can't you get
Well,
over it?
and the answer to this, right? I mean, I one time a good friend of mine, I was working at Focus on the Family, and he's an executive, and he grew up in a sort of cookie cutter Ward Cleaver sort of home. Really good guy, and he was 6 foot, few inches taller than me, and we were just talking one day, and he asked me what it was like, and we were standing up, and I grabbed him by his shirt, and I started to jerk him around the room. And I said, "Now answer my question, think straight, figure this out, live your life, react." I said, that's going on all the time inside of me. So the energy, because the lies that the devil tells us, this, deeply this, the
No.
lies that the devil tells you about who you are, like you're a piece of whatever, or You know, the list can be a mile long. Don't, you have to be reprogrammed. You have to go through this purification of the memory that St. John of the Cross speaks of. You have to, you know, it's for years, Joseph, I would write down, that's what I put in the book. I would write down, I would literally write down the lies I'm hearing in my head, the contrasting truth in the New Testament. No, I am loved. I have been adopted. I am free. I do have a purpose. I'm not a piece of blank. I'm a child of God. I was created in my mother's womb for an eternal purpose. And I did that over and over and over again. And it took decades. You know, I don't know how much it still affects me. I mean, I'm close to tears as I'm explaining it to you, but I'm not, I do know that I'm not dominated by it anymore.
Wow.
It's not the predominant driver to my interior life or who I am as a person.
Mm.
I'm very much at peace and live a very joyful life.
I'm
Even
getting,
go ahead.
I'm getting there.
Yeah, God be praised. Well, listen, all you got to do is hang out with Jesus,
Yes,
and things get better. It's not simple, it's not easy, but that's why he came, right? To set the captives free.
know.
And he's setting you free. He's still setting me free. And that process is lifelong. And there's, you know, greater and lesser degrees of freedom. But if we engage in all that the church gives us, it's ours to have.
Specifically, I think a lot, and I hope, you know, we have time to get into this. I think there's a lot of things in here. You don't mention the LGBT community or homosexuality in any way in this book.
Right.
But when I was reading it, because the LGBT community is part of my ministry, and they're always they have a special place in my heart. There's a lot of trauma, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of abuse that people have experienced that later identify as LGBT. I mean, I don't want to give a lot of stats, but this is the one that I always go back to. 47% of gay men who identify as gay were sexually abused by a man in their childhood.
In their
And
childhood.
that's compared to 7% of straight men who experience homosexual molestation. It's a huge
Wow.
difference. And there's been other studies that have verified that too, and also have found a great deal of PTSD
Right.
in the gay male community. And this is, I just want to read this real quick, what you wrote, and then we could lead into the discussion of the rest of the book. You can and will find peace if you seek the peace that he brought and paid for, that he bought and paid for by his own torment and sacrifice on your behalf. So there is hope.
Yes.
Said. One of the things you talked about is that we look for answers outside the church.
Yeah.
This is, I think, the first way. I mean, it would be great that people who have trauma, have abuse, at the time they're experiencing it, usually don't get help or seek help because they don't know what's going on and they're too ashamed. But later on, when people are confronting the real issues that crop up from it, if they could find and seek the truth. But most of the time, and I'm one of them, what people do is they seek answers in the world.
Yeah.
And for me, it was in homosexuality. Did you, I mean, I don't want to ask too personal questions, but did you ever experience where you said, you know, you had siblings that got into addictions? Is that ever anything that you ever, was that anything?
No, I mean, no, I came to Christ pretty young. I did move into some sinful behaviors in many ways, sexual, idolatry, with New Age things, that sort of thing. but I came to Christ, fairly young, mainly because I was, I was ready to put a bullet in my head, and just because of that interior torment.
You were in college.
Yeah, I mean, I was in and out of college. I didn't graduate college. I was in my early 30s because I was an angry young man, and that didn't work very well in the class.
So Dan, you were actually suicidal.
I was, yeah. I mean,
So
I
that's
was
the
in,
way you dealt with it.
well, I was in total despair. I interiorly, when you go through, I mean, and listen, people have been through worse stuff. You went
Of
through way
course.
worse stuff. You went through way worse stuff than me,
It's
but
I don't want to say it's worse. It's just different.
well, but we all process at a different level, right? I mean, one person can get knocked around as a kid and be fine, and another it wrecks them. It depends on how sensitive you are and all that. But I was wrecked. By the time I was 18, 19, I was really done. And I was just looking for a way. I'm going, okay, somebody needs to give me a reason for this suffering, because if there's no good reason, and what's going on in my head and my heart is not going to go away, and I don't even, I didn't even know how to have relationships. I didn't know how to, I was just directionless, just tormented inside. And I cried out to God. I didn't know God as we understand him in this context, but I said, listen, if you're there, you've got to help me. I don't know what to do. I need help. And I remember weeping in the parking lot on Thunderbird and 19th in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, of the apartment complex I lived in, saying, you got to help me. And by God's grace, he answered. It just took a while. But so coming out of what I did in my childhood, I had some time to go into areas of sinful, behavior that were destructive, but I never got into addictive behaviors like my siblings did. Most of my siblings did. God be praised. And also, when I came to Christ, I was freed, like instantly, of at least one area, which was the use of porn. I was freed instantly of that proclivity. Sometimes God does that with some people, sometimes he doesn't.
Right.
And he does it for whatever is necessary in the soul. So as I became a Christian, I didn't come in with addiction or I have to battle addiction. I just had to battle just the constant junk of sin bundle of sin that I was, if that makes sense.
To correlate, your experiences, what you're talking about with the LGBT situation, is it in families a lot of times where there is an LGBT child, and if there's siblings in that family, a lot of times you will see addiction or some other, or porn addictions. There's some other sort of dysfunction in that. So it affects, and you talked about sensitivity. Abuse in childhood affects people very, very differently. Most men, in terms of abuse, will attempt to cope with it through alcoholism, drug
Right.
addiction, promiscuity. They don't have good relationships with women. Now, a lot of people, because and some researchers and therapists will talk about um, this propensity for gay men to have experienced child abuse, specifically sexual abuse. Sometimes people will argue that, well, I was abused, you were abused as a child, you're not gay. But it's a small minority of men who will react in that way, 2%.
Right.
So it's very small. Most men will react differently.
Right.
It's a small percent.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, and the soul is pretty complex, right? And how we react is different. But God be praised. No matter who you are, I have to say this to whoever's listening, no matter what you've experienced, life is hard, but there's a way in which we can find peace, lasting peace and joy, which is what I think connected us and why we're talking today. And I hope we can leave people with that hope. And I think you do that in your ministry when you're
try.
going out and meeting with people face to face. You're writing an incredibly difficult book that you wrote, but I think, which, as you say, many people don't want to deal with or face. But I think if we don't have people like you, and if who are willing to, like, your book is probably the most vulnerable book by any Catholic I've ever read. For me, many people have said my own vulnerability is what helps them to connect with me, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm committed to continuing to do that. But it is hard, as you know, to be prudent. And how do you've said way more than I would ever say. You've written way more than I would ever reveal. But I think people need to look across the table or in the eyes of another person, and I think what they want to see is, do you understand my pain? Have you suffered the way I'm suffering?
Okay.
And because if you can say yes, then now we have a bridge, right? And we can build this bond of saying, you know what? We're all broken, but Jesus, God became man incarnate, holy God, holy man. He died on the cross. He gave himself up for our sins. And he promises us a way to be healed and to be whole. And will you come with me? Let me show you the way. It builds that trust so we can send that message. But if we're out there, shouting, "Hey, you're a sinner," or one of the worst depictions of Christianity ever is Fred Phelps, right? Is it Fred Phelps? God hates fags, right? Or
Westboro Baptist Church, yeah.
Right. I mean, come on, folks, right? Well, the gospel is about, I'm broken, Joseph Chambra's broken, we're all broken, we all need the healing of God. And so let's go about that. Let's say yes, let's move forward together.
I want to get right into your book too, and into the meat of it. And this is something you wrote. Your book is funny too, because I was highlighting and dog-earing a lot of pages. Just, you wrote, sometimes the battle was so intense that it took days, weeks, months, and even years to overcome. This is important because I have a lot of guys contact me because, I've been out of the gay community for 20 years. I left in 1999, and it hasn't been easy, and it hasn't been all joyful. There's been joyful times. But I would say most of the time it's been difficult. It's been intense. It's been
Yeah.
rough. And I think a number of the men who contact me have and I don't blame them, have a hard time with that. Suffering is hard to deal with. And I think there's a notion that, and it's romantic and it's nice, that when you have that conversion, you're going to be floating on a cloud, you're going to levitate, you're going to have locutions. You might have those things. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it isn't easy. It's been tough. It's been really, really, really difficult. It's kind of like when I was in the gay life, I don't think the devil bothered me at all. But I think when I switched sides and I came over to Jesus Christ, it's like, okay, now I know who you are. So, and you talk about this later in the book, and I want to bring out that quote too.
Yeah. No, it is a battle. I would say probably 80% of my life I would describe as torment, and 20% as freedom, joy. Now there's sort of that's a gradation, right? The worst kind of torment as a young man, and then coming to Christ, and then slowly being healed. But yeah, it takes a long, long time, depending on how deep in a life of sin you lead. The more memories you have, the more difficult it is. But God be praised, if we just cling to him and hang on to him and just keep working through it, we're going to be free. And listen, and if we're not free in this life, if it doesn't get done, it'll get done as long as we stay with him, right? And some people may not ever have that fullness of joy in this life. And of course, it's always going to be at the beatific vision, that fullness is going to be extraordinary. So we don't get that now. And now what we get, Jesus said, is the road is narrow and difficult. But he also says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So on that narrow, difficult road, he comes beside us and he takes part of the load on him, and he puts his hand around us like the beautiful depiction in the Passion of the Christ. Who was the the guy who helped Jesus, you know, to carry his cross. It's classic in the Stations of the Cross. But anyway,
Simon.
yeah, yeah. So, you know, Gibson gets it right there. The guy, you know, I know in that case Jesus is the one who's suffering, and but when Simon of Cyrene helps Jesus, that's the way Jesus works with us. We're battered and bruised, and he says, "Look, it's going to be okay. We're gonna make it." But the key is we got to stay with him. We got to stay in the fight.
Yep.
We got to be patient
Yep.
and be grateful at each incremental moment of healing that we experience.
And this is the difference between a more masculine spirituality and a feminine, because like I think sometimes, and I relate this again to the LGBT community, I think the approach is like a mother's love. Come here, baby, I'm going to make everything okay. Come here, I just want you to be happy. You know,
Yeah,
we're going to make everything okay. What you're saying is, no, doing the right thing and being faithful to the truth is going to be tough, and it's going to
yeah,
require suffering.
right.
That you don't hear in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I know. You know, it's sad. I know your story where you turned to the church and you were told, you know, you were told lies and given direction that would keep you in bondage instead of set you free. And it's tough. I mean, the church is very effeminate, and I don't mean feminine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean weak, uh, wimpy. It's hard for me to come up with Christian words. You know.
No, those are good. Patrick Coffin in my interview said the same exact thing as you just said.
Yeah, I mean, and I just, it certainly is no depiction of Christ. I mean, wow, what he endured and how he fought, and look at what his disciples did, and you know, they went to their death. Peter said, "Listen, I'm not worthy to be crucified right side up. Start with my feet upside down." You know, uh, those are real men, and I think that you know, it's just, I don't know. Our culture is pretty sick and upside down. And what we want to do, and I think it's really self-love, and is we want to feel good about ourselves. So then what we do is we try to make others feel good about themselves. And that makes us feel good instead of the harder thing, which is say, you know, friend, I love you. You're in sin and you need to stop.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that that bothers you, and then risk all of that. But that's, I mean, that's what Jesus did for us, is in the face of, I mean, there's no therapeutic version of Jesus, right? There's just take up your cross and follow me.
Connected to these points you're making, this is where you talk about discernment of spirits, and this dropped on my head like a ton of bricks, because I hadn't read much about discernment of spirits. I sort of knew something it was about, but and you talk about, you know, following your heart, finding a pseudo peace, and this is really important. The good spirit has actually caused the opposite of peace and seeks to create inner turmoil.
Yeah,
Now, again, in terms of this is counterculture, and again in terms of the LGBT ministry within the church, it's this is not what it teaches. It teaches that, you know, your feelings, you know, are of primary importance. Are you feeling welcomed? Are you feeling affirmed? You know, are you feeling loved? Are you feeling all these, you know, mommy wonderful feelings? And if you know, and in your life, are you feeling as a gay man or a gay woman, you know, are you feeling happy? Are you feeling this and that and that? And I have to say, in the gay life, like you say, that's a quote from you, a pseudo peace. I
right.
was feeling those things, and anything that caused turmoil within me, usually originating from somebody in my family who thought, my dad, you know, who my dad thought I wasn't on the right path. I was thinking, whoa, that's evil. They're judgmental. They're dictating what I should do. They don't love me, blah, 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 blah. But that's the opposite of what is true. And that's what you're talking about.
Well, and so anyone caught up in sexual sin, homosexual, heterosexual, doesn't matter. Their lower nature is ruling them, right? So, and their lower nature becomes their God. And your lower nature is all about your senses and how you feel. And instead of battling those and getting those in line, it's like, I don't know what your feeling about this is, but there's this talk about a gay gene, right?
Right.
And I don't really care what the science says. This is what I say. I'm heterosexual. My instinct is to have sexual will agree. That's my base instinct. But I don't. Why? Because it's destructive to do that, right? To me and to her and to God. So I don't. So the whole process of healing, Joseph, is flipping that whole paradigm on its head. It's saying no. Your sexuality is not evil in and of itself, as long as it's aligned to God's will and purposes. It's beautiful and peaceful and procreative and unitive and all of that.
Right.
It can't rule you. It has to be subordinated to the truth. And
Yeah.
that's the challenge. I think when I look at, I'm no expert. When I look at the homosexual community or any, sort of licentious orientation, it's that obesity, for instance, your body and its desires becomes your God. And so then you eat yourself to destruction, right? Or sexuality. I mean, you can do any of that. But Jesus came to help us, to give us the strength by the Holy Spirit, the sacraments, to slowly, and this is that purification process, right the ship. I no longer, I'm at a place now where, I mean, of course, my testosterone is high, but let me just say that my testosterone is very high, but I have no inclinations toward any woman other than my wife. Why? It's habituated. It's effort. I don't stare. I don't give myself a moment. I don't indulge in, looking at other women in any way.
Awesome.
So, but I struggle with that as a young man. So yeah, it just flips everything on its head. And what makes you feel good becomes your God. But as you know, it doesn't really make you feel good. It only actually it inebriates you from the pain of the suffering that drove you to that
Exactly.
false remedy. And the
Exactly.
tough part is the cycle is you go, I feel terrible inside. I'm in a horrible, so I go sin. I've done this. You go sin. When you're in the sin, you have all the highs of the sin, alcohol, sex, whatever, right? But then once that wears off, which is usually in a matter of hours or just a few days, now you're back into the sadness and the pain. With God, though, when we begin to break that cycle, we go sin, reconciliation, freedom, and then, but what's supposed to happen is the event and the reaction are supposed to begin to separate over time. And then we're less and less ruled by that. And we begin to experience
Yeah.
authentic peace. Sorry for getting on my soapbox, but
Oh, no, that's important. What I agree 100% with what you're saying. It's very applicable in terms, it's applicable towards anyone. It's very applicable, I think, towards straight people. But where I think some in the Catholic Church have gone wrong is that, these inordinate desires, or there's these disordered desires, or these lustful thoughts or actions, um, have that is something. But within the LGBT, it's an identity. It's not just,
right,
you can't say that my attraction or my relationship with someone of the same sex is in that same category, because that is my identity. It would be
right,
like saying, well, a man cannot have sexual, longings for a woman, and can't, you know, live those properly within a marriage,
right,
because I can do that as well. That's where a lot of people in the church have gone wrong. But
right.
they don't connect it like you did. Well, is that your identity, or is that connected to something else? That's where they don't want to go. And is this the way you are dealing with that something else, typically in your childhood? That's where they don't
I,
want to go.
I loved what you said recently. It was on Facebook. Leela Miller picked it up, or Leela Lawler picked it up, I think. But you were talking about something Father James Martin said, and you said that's not my identity. I am a man. I am something like it was a beautiful, simple phrase. I am a man. I'm a child of God. Do you remember exactly what you wrote there?
Well, he was talking about the LGBT identity. How dare you discriminate against anybody with an LGBT identity? And I said, no, I'm a human being. I'm a man, and I'm a child of God.
Love that.
You can't reduce me to that.
Yeah, perfect. I love that. Avera Maria Santos also said the similar things, even in the context of the whole black-white difficulties that are going on in the church. She's like, listen, I'm black. That is part of my experience, but that is not all that I am. Now, I know it doesn't compare to sinful behavior,
No,
but
and
it's
that's something that somebody's born with,
right.
their ethnicity.
Yeah.
But there's absolutely zero evidence. Actually, there's a lot of evidence to the contrary that people are born gay.
Yeah, I think we're all born broken though, you
Yeah.
know. So let's let the God of the universe heal us from this, the issues of original sin and our brokenness, and we do have DNA issues that some people have a proclivity to become addicted to substances, to
Said it
gaming.
early. Yeah, you said it earlier. Sensitivity has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, but we can be free. That's the key. No matter who we are, what we're doing, or where we are, as long as we don't stay there, and we give ourselves to Him, He's going to set us free.
Yeah. This is something you wrote that was very powerful. You wrote, all the thoughts in your head are not yours, and you shouldn't listen to them. Now,
Yeah,
see, this is the opposite. Again, this is the opposite, specifically that you hear in the LGBT community. Follow your heart.
right,
You know,
right.
what's best for you.
Yeah,
And I mean, I was told that by a Catholic priest when I was younger. He was saying, Joe, you know what's right, you know what's wrong, and for you, this is something that you feel very deeply in your heart, and you're not doing anything wrong.
He just made your conscience God. He just
Yeah,
subtracted your conscience with your conscience has become God. There is no God but your conscience. I mean, it's diabolical. What you heard was demonic. But yeah, that phrase is grammatically a little funky, right? But I've
sounds good.
it's very effective in helping people to understand that the enemy is constantly trying to tell us, take us to hell. I mean, Father Ripperger, who I very much trust, has said that not only are we assigned a guardian angel, but there's also a demon assigned not by God, but assigned to us, who's constantly working to take us to hell. And I think there are demons and personal, but also more, that whenever there's a path of sin, it's going to be telling you this is what you need. You
Yep,
know, you have an attraction to a man. If you fulfill that attraction, you're going to be fine. This is who you are.
yep,
These are
yep,
all lies, right? So it plays out in all sin. But yeah, so, and this is a thing that's so powerful, and I accidentally stumbled on that phrase. I mean, I made it up, but for my students, it's one of the most memorable things they repeat from the class I teach on discernment of spirit at the Avila Institute, because for the first time in their life, they go, "Oh, that's not me. Oh,
yep,
I have authority over that. Oh, I can fight that. Oh, you mean I don't have to be sad. And look, I'm a melancholic. I'm an extremely emotional person, you know, but you can be a melancholic and be joyful. You can be melancholic and have peace. But you've got to learn, as Scripture says, to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, and to begin to have custody of your own mind. It's your mind. You can determine by God's grace. Don't get me wrong. I'm no Pelagian, but you can determine by God's grace what comes in and what goes out and what goes on. Very few people need medication to solve that problem.
Yeah.
Most people just need scripture and Catholic tradition.
This is another line where it just went boom. Um, you said, be very wary of this voice in this spirit. When he proposes ideas connected to past wounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's, I mean, that's very deep. We could spend 3 hours talking about that. But that's something that people don't want to talk about. And that's the place that they don't want to go.
Yeah. Well, and
Because
that's,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
that wrecks, especially if you have an LGBT identity, that wrecks the whole foundation that you've built.
Right.
Because, like, are you saying that this thing that was proposed to me, let's say as a child, okay, I'm gay, that was all based on a past wound?
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're saying, and that's true.
Yeah. Well, and those wounds are places where you're vulnerable, right? And
Yep.
where you know, when you're abused, or you deal with abuse in whatever form, when that's occurring, there's a, and I'm no psychologist and I have not been helped by psychology, but I know enough to know that when that's occurring, that's a psychological trauma. That is something, you know, it's like when you cut yourself. When you cut yourself, you naturally heal, right? But when you're psychologically wounded, it doesn't work the same way. It until it's addressed and dealt with most of the time or much of the time, it stays open and bleeding, and you know, it has all of the pus, and I hate to get gross, whatever.
No.
But
Jose Maria Escriva talked about that too, and
did he tell me about that?
he gave that analogy about a wound and how it's very painful for the doctor to clean the wound,
Yeah,
dress the wound,
right.
especially like you said, if it's one that's festered and
Yeah.
become, putrid, but you have to do it or
Yeah.
it won't heal.
Yeah, and if you inebriate, all you do is pour poison into the wound that makes it worse. But when you face it and deal with it in all of its difficulty, which is very hard, I mean, as you know, you know as well as anyone, because it's so ugly, and it's so, and there's shame because we've been wounded, and then we've done things that are by our own will, and that certainly was my own case. That I did things by my own will that are horrifying to me, having to repent of those and having to face those things. But until you do that, unlike an external wound that heals on your arm or whatever, it won't go away. And it rules you. And the enemy knows exactly where it is because he has access to our memories, and he pokes it and he brings it up again. What he does is he pokes and he proposes. He says, he pokes at the wound, it hurts, and then he says, now go do that thing that always inebriates you. Go have sex with that guy, go drink, go take drugs, go work more hours, go, you know, whatever the thing is. That's the way it works.
This is an issue. It's actually an issue that I've been recently dealing with someone who's contacted me, and this is something that I see in a lot of guys who have left the gay community, trying to leave the gay community, trying to stop, not so much dealing with the desires, but trying to stop the activity. This is something you wrote I thought was interesting. If you are a past orientated person, the tactic will often be to remind you of your past sins, weaknesses, and failures in order to convince you that you can't possibly move forward with your plans to honor God or do some good. And a lot of guys do write to me with that issue where, and I'm guilty of it too. I ruminated for so long, for so long. And I had a young fellow write to me just recently, and he said, I've been to confession, but I can't forgive myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's so, I get it. I mean, there's nothing in gay I didn't do, and it was very difficult to accept God's forgiveness. And that had to have come from the devil because, I mean, here I am. went to confession. It was difficult to say those things in front of the priest, although I think he could have cared less about what I was confessing and, you
Yeah.
know, what it had to deal with. But it hung over me. It just hung and hung and hung.
Yeah, I mean, and I, similarly, I didn't have as long a career in sin as you did, but but uh no, nonetheless, even now as we're talking, things are coming back to me that make me sad. They don't control me anymore or dominate me anymore, but they do make me sad, and I'm sorry that I did them, and I'm sorry I participated. But I also know that if that lingers at all, I know what to do, which is what I wrote the book about, which is say, to hell with you. I'm not that person anymore. I am a new man in Jesus. I've been redeemed. That sin has been paid for. And I'm not, you can go to hell with that. And in Jesus' name, I reject it. And you got to fight like that. And for everybody out there who has that, you need to understand it's just not going to go away overnight.
Yeah.
It's going to take you a long time, but there will be peace, and there eventually it'll come. And there will be a time when most of the time you don't think about your sins. But it's, the homosexual lifestyle, I imagine, one of the things I talk about in terms of progress of the soul, I don't remember if I mentioned in this book, but the movement out of habitual mortal sin is a movement of entangling and a breaking of ties. Like you had to change your entire world, right, to get free. Like you couldn't keep hanging out where you hung out. You couldn't live where you lived. I
No.
mean, everything had to be severed. Well, that is painful, but it also is helpful
Yeah.
in terms of your psyche and your ability to break free of the memories. Like it took me decades before I've been back to California to speak a number of times, and that's where the most painful part of my life was. And it took me decades, and I actually went to places on purpose where I experienced suffering. Like we lived on Coral Beach, off of Malibu Beach, off Old Malibu Road when I was a kid. And I went there one time with Dr. Anthony Lillis, and I went there and I said, I just need to pray because I need to get rid of this crap that's still there, that's connected to the sins I committed to there, what happened to me there, all of that. But for people who want to be free, you gotta sever the ties. You gotta move away. You gotta leave the state. Sometimes you gotta leave. You gotta leave your job. But that's the hard work. Otherwise, the enemy has too many pathways into your heart and into your mind to resurrect all of the crap.
Yeah. It's strange because I did pretty much the same thing you did, and where my heart goes out again to people in the LGBT community is because what other sort of situation um, where a whole culture has built up around this. Like I'll just use myself for an example. I mean, I lived in the gay community. I worked in the gay community. I socialized in the gay community. If I had some sort of worship, it was in the gay community. I read gay books. I saw gay movies. I went to
Right.
gay restaurants. Most of
Right.
my friends were gay. Um, and the Catholic Church, again, some in the Catholic Church has made this very easy for gay
Right.
people because now they have gay masses, pride masses, gay ministries that affirm everything. Number one, why the heck would you leave?
Right.
Even if life sucks, because I know people that are in that situation, but they stay because they're kind of like, well, this is who I am. This is what I am. Where the hell am I gonna go? You know,
And they're not all horrible people, are they?
no. Oh, you
Right.
mean in the no?
Yeah. I mean, they're not. And some of, I mean, we think of it, I think those of us who are not in that realm think in these really weird terms about everybody has horns or whatever, but it's not like that. So it's very hard to break out of that kind of a community.
Because it's tough. Where do you go? What do you do? I mean, it was only by the grace of God that I found some support that helped me, because I don't know what would have happened to me. It's tragic that so many in the church have bought into all this.
Well,
I yeah.
unfortunately, and I don't know. I think Judgment Day is going to look bad for those folks who are just trying to help people feel good in their sin.
Yeah, I don't think the onus will be, and there has been, I think, and I think you touched on it there. I think there has been some who demonize the LGBT community, or people in there within the, within Christian communities of the Catholic Church. But I think the onus, like you said, is going to be on those who had the opportunity to change someone's life and to introduce them to the truth, and they did not do it. They did the absolute opposite, because I know people in that community, and they don't know and they don't understand, and again, they're dealing with past abuse that hasn't been addressed, and
Yeah,
now it's morphed into mental illness and all kinds of things. So
yeah,
I think God will be quite merciful with them.
yeah. And the others, it's the millstone. It's the millstone treatment. I think they're going to get.
I think
So
you're right. I'll leave it to God. You wrote this. um, when we are in desolation, the voice or inspiration of the good spirit is hard to hear
yeah,
and understand.
yeah.
And I spent so many years in desolation. I had so
Yeah,
many people
you and me
praying
both.
for me. And there were times where I was kind of like, uh, maybe, especially during the AIDS crisis when it was so bad. And, my life was certainly in jeopardy. I was kind of, maybe I need to do something else, try something else. I just couldn't do it. Couldn't
Yeah.
do it.
Desolation is tough. Desolation, just for listeners, is defined as, in summary, doubt, despair, and narcissism, but a draw to low and earthly things, a darkness, a feeling of darkness, a feeling of suppression, a feeling of weight, of doom and gloom and all of that. And it's sort of like this gigantic demonic black blanket that presses in on you. And it's very hard to hear the voice of God. By God's grace, I mean, the rules of Ignatius, and how he taught, what a gift to the church he was, Saint Ignatius. He taught specific strategies, of course, which I outline in the book, about, well, how do you fight when you're in that state? The
Right.
one thing you don't do
Yeah.
is, when you're there, is you don't make decisions, because that's rule number 5, right? Because you're stuck and you can't hear the voice of God. But what you do is you go to your spiritual disciplines, you get to mass, you go serve somebody, you go serve the homeless, you go do something that is toward God, contrary to what the bad spirit's trying to get you to do as you're in that desolation, which is to think about your sin, or to think about your disordered sexual desires. And again, I mean, heterosexual, homosexual, doesn't matter. To think about your disordered, proclivities to inebriation, whatever those may be. It doesn't matter what flavor it is. But when you do the opposite, even when you don't feel like it, this is one of the hardest things, Joseph, that I learned is, and I learned it one day. Well, we don't have enough time, but one of the hardest things is that when the moment you feel like, I can't do it, and the devil's saying, yeah, you can't do it, you're terrible, you're bad, don't you remember this, you're horrible, and look at all the bad things, and you're going, I can't. But the second you turn and go, no, I'm going to fight, I've had just it all lift instantaneously. Now, I've also had long, difficult battles, but God is so kind. He gives us what we need, and he'll set us free if we'll fight.
Okay. This was another. I know we're going kind of long. This was
No,
another. This was another like boom moment for me in this book. You wrote, by God's grace, I was blessed with desolation. And then I'm skipping a couple lines, but this is still a quote. He revealed that he allowed me to come to this place so I could cry out to him for healing and strength. This is especially with the LGBT community, because I have a lot of parents ask me, my son, my daughter, what do I do? How do I what do I do? What do I do? I say pray. How do I get them out of the life? I said it's very, very difficult. I don't know if anybody really that's moved out of the LGBT identity has had like that Augustine moment. I think it's more
Right.
like St. Paul. I
Yeah.
think you're just brought low. Things become so bad. I mean, that's the way it happened for me. I was so desolated. I didn't know what to do. Like you said right there, I just cried out for healing and strength. And that was it. That was it.
Yeah, and that's often, and that process, by the way, isn't a one-time thing. I know you know this. It happened to me just last year. As my dad was dying, I'm dealing with weird family situations. There's an estate, all that sort of nut stuff, and I'm on a plane. I'm sick. I can reach out and touch the bathroom door.
Oh man.
I'm already sick. I don't have emergency medication with me. I'm going to see lawyers and sit across from somebody who's hostile to me,
Oh
and
boy.
and it was just, but when that's what's going on, it's sort of like going to the like I've been sick so many times. When you kind of know the game, you just go and face it and deal with it. When you don't know the game and you don't know how to get out, you're stuck in it. But
You
when you
panic
know it,
too, yeah.
yes, you do panic, and in many different ways. But when you know the game, you can begin to go, okay, I'm crying out, I'm calling my wife, I'm sending her emails, and she's like, okay, he's in desolation, he's totally losing his mind, he's going to be fine. And she so anyway, good news is, I'm sorry for being a broken record, we can be free.
No.
We will be free.
But you also write about how it feels like the desolation will never end.
Yeah,
That's a
that
quote.
is a
That's a
yeah,
quote. Yeah.
yeah, that's a common characteristic of desolation, is that the enemy says it's never going to end. The enemy tells you that lie. The enemy says you can't be. I mean, Joseph, how many times did you hear you can't be free? I don't know.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, I mean,
I
you can't.
still hear it. I still hear
Yeah,
it. You also write about, healing here, and how healing, you say, is rooted in wounds of the past. We've talked about that. You talked about how desolation is a gift from God, and how oh, this was really great. You wrote, okay, we are touched on the reality that without him we are nothing and really deserve nothing. In fact, the only thing any living soul has ever earned on their own is hell. That was just crazy
yeah.
good. Crazy
And
good.
but why is it good? Why is it good? It's because
I
you know.
think I think it hits people right here. And I
Yeah.
mean, coming from Catholicism, it's always here I am, Lord, It is
Please,
everything is
please don't put that in my head.
I'm sorry, but it's that, that's a way I was raised. I was raised, Jesus is a caterpillar, and then he's a
Yeah.
butterfly. And
No.
that's how I was. And this is like, whoa, okay, let me
Yeah.
think about this.
Yeah, and I think when it isn't, it's a false mercy, and I actually did a video on false mercy inspired by your nemesis, Father James Martin. But it's a false mercy to pretend I'm okay, you're okay, to say no. It's a true and authentic mercy to say, look, you're inoperably sick, and you're going to die a miserable death unless you accept this remedy. And the remedy comes, and you can't afford it, and it comes for free, and it comes with love and care, but it's not going to be easy. But if you accept it, you're going to be whole again. That's the gospel. I mean, Joseph Chambra is broken and deserves hell. Dan Burke is broken and deserves hell. And by God's grace, Jesus came to set us free, and he gave his life for us.
I want to finish up. I could spend like 2 more hours. I want to finish up our conversation with these 2 points. You touched on them earlier, but I think it's important for me to actually read the sentence here. You wrote, this is so important. I've talked about this with people, but I can't articulate it in the way that you are. The enemy pitches his camp to prepare for his assault on you. He watches you day and night without rest, for he needs no rest. He learns your sins, your weaknesses, your proclivities, and your inclinations. And you talk about this having a root, this is grounded in a root sin. And I saw that too as a root wound, where
Yeah.
the devil knows
Yeah.
what's gone on with you, unfortunately. And he
Yeah.
and he's seen, and I've talked about this with guys online and actually in person when I've tried to help people. He's seen what type of pornography you look at. He
Right.
knows what's tripping you. So like a lot of guys have this fascination with like daddy porn,
Right.
where it's men and they have this longing for a strong man to
Yeah.
love them. And that was me. And the devil led me right into it, where I thought I could find my dad, my father. And this is why I'm calling this podcast Finding Our Father. I thought I was finding the Father. I thought I was finding my father. It was not. It was a false, completely false
Yeah.
father.
And as you've rightly said, he knew that wound in you, and he knew how to poke it, and then he knew how to poke it so it hurt, and then to propose
Yep.
a false remedy, of course, which is porn, or living out what you see in porn. And then of course, then once the high is over of that engagement, then he begins to tell you how bad you are, right? So he gets you on both sides of the deal, kicks you in it convinces you to do something, then kicks you in the teeth for doing it. And that's that horrible cycle. But right, the analogy is from St. Ignatius himself. I didn't make it up. Of course, he says the devil encamps. And of course, scripture also says the devil is always prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he desires. And if you know anything about how lions work, they do that in around the edges of villages, around the edges of activity, or the edges of groups of animals, to watch and to see where there's a weakness and they can attack. But the enemy knows our historical wounds, and he knows our sin patterns, and is constantly trying to get through the same door he's always gone through, until we begin to shore that up with reconciliation, Eucharist, the graces that the church provides to us to win that battle. And we can win it.
Yeah, I wanted to end with this, and you wrote this. This is another quote. The more you know yourself, truly know yourself, the less vulnerable you will be to the enemy's attacks. And I think you talk about this in the book. Part of knowing yourself is knowing, when you talk about a root sin, or knowing that root wound, which caused all this
Yeah.
you know cascading sort of descents into sin. If
Right.
you know it, and I've and I've had good spiritual direction, thank God, but
Good.
I've also had really good therapy, psychotherapy. I was blessed to know the Dr. Nicolosi Sr., and now I know Dr. Nicolosi Jr., and they have really helped me to understand and go back to what you experienced was some pretty intense abuse in my childhood. And that's the place where the devil doesn't want you to go. That's in the LGBT community. No, you were born that way.
Right.
There's nothing there, nothing there, nothing
Yeah.
there. It's very appealing, I think, to parents of LGBT kids, especially mothers, because there have been priests that have told these audiences, say, you had nothing to do with your son's homosexuality. He was born that way. And what is the devil hiding back there? What is it? What is it back there?
And if you
It's
love your child, you have to be willing to go, okay, how did I contribute? Because if you don't know how you contributed, or how you allowed that in, if you will, or provided an environment where it was easy to come in, then you can't help anyone out of it, right? I mean, I don't know if that's the right thinking, but
that's exactly.
yeah. And you've got to face the wounds. you did a good job of illustrating, you know, that nothing wrong here, everything's good. No, you're born that way. Nothing wrong here, everything's good. No, you're born that way. I mean, that's probably a message repeated over and over and over again. But I don't think it's unique to the LGBTQ community, but it's certainly an important aspect. I mean that in a negative way of keeping people in bondage. But it's the same with any sin, with any woundedness, right? The enemy doesn't want us to face it with God, because then we're going to be free. But once we can face it, then we gain insight. We can see the pathway to freedom. We can receive healing. We can weep. We can be truly consoled in a healthy way, and we can rise and walk with him away from that sin. Not that we dwell on the past, but for me, I don't know about you. I mean, I've wondered,
yeah.
I've often wondered if writing this for you, you know, was a full kind of immersion in it to unravel it all, right?
I think
And
that's right.
and then exit out of it.
Yeah.
Because you're clear about it.
Yeah.
You're and not everybody needs to write a book like that. But I've certainly had to deal with, you know, I love my dad dearly, right? And God rest his soul, and I think I'm going to see him again. But there are ways that he raised me which were damaging, and I need, and it's okay. And I still love him, but I need to face those things.
And men don't want to talk about it. I've talked to so many, you know, gay men because they know where I'm coming from, and they said, "Oh, Joe, you know, my relationship with my dad was fine and good." And then, you know, we talk a little more about the dynamics in the family with him and his mom, and there was definitely something there that was completely off and insane. And it's just
whether
men,
intended or not.
yeah,
Right?
and don't, yeah. Some people raise their kids just the way they were raised, and
Yeah.
but men don't, and that's why it was so important, I think, with this book, I'll Beat a Dead Horse Again, that it, at least you were willing to admit that, you know, your woundedness, you know, has played a big part in your journey with God. And it's important because I think men, need the space, and in a sense kind of need the permission to say, yeah, well, I too was hurt and wounded as childhood, and although I'm 30, I'm 40, I'm 50, it's still bothering me, and I haven't addressed it, and it's never too late.
It's never too late. And the thing is, you know, years ago, I when I was wrestling with my own pain and suffering um, as a Christian, and kind of going, well, how am I? Why is it that I'm still experiencing it? Maybe we could end our time together
Okay.
with this. And I typed out every passage in the New Testament on suffering and categorized. I mean, I typed. That's how old I am. Categorized them all and all of that. But this is what I wrote afterwards. If I have not been in pain, he has not relieved me. If I have not been sad, he has not lifted my heart to heaven. If I have not been reviled, he has not comforted me. If I have not been abandoned, he has not come to me. If I have not been broken, he has not healed me. If I have not been lost, he has not shown me the way. If I have not been in sin, he has not redeemed me. If I have not been without a friend, he has not walked beside me. If I have not mourned, he has not comforted me. If I have not been betrayed, he has not restored me. If I have not been in chains, he has not set me free. If I have not wept, he has not dried my tears. If I have not been in the depths of darkness, he has not brought me into the light. If I have not suffered, I have not known him.
Yeah, I can relate to that. God, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Dan. I'm very, very thankful that you're here. That
Me too to you.
thank you that we had a miracle, and you know, God, because I think, yeah, your voice needs to be heard more than ever. Thank you so much, Dan. God bless you.
Yes,
God bless you.
you take care.